news tonight, an ABC News exclusive. Inside the most secretive nation on Earth, North Korea indicates it will resume negotiating over nuclear weapons. General Motors will cut 25,000 jobs in the U.S. There is a huge ripple effect, well beyond the automobile business. A breakthrough in fertility. The first baby conceived with ovarian tissue from another woman. Medicine on the cutting edge. A new front in the culture wars. Praise the Lord and shame the competition. The long-distance carrier that claims its competitors promote sin. And the music industry turned on its head again. Blame the cell phones and the fraud.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight, Charles Gibson.
Good evening. We start tonight with the puzzle that is North Korea. ABC News has gotten into the country, and we'll take the first of a series of looks at conditions there in just a moment. The North Koreans have refused to engage in talks about their nuclear program for a year now, even as they announce they do have nuclear weapons. In just the past 2 days, however, they've given indication they might be willing to resume six-nation talks about their nuclear weapons, perhaps because they have a food crisis and need aid. We say perhaps because less is known about North Korea and what's going on there than any nation on Earth. ABC's Bob Woodruff tonight from Pyongyang, North Korea.
Charlie, a high-ranking North Korean official has told us they have offered to return to the nuclear talks if the United States backs away from some of its more heated rhetoric. Specifically, he referred to comments made by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who called North Korea an outpost of tyranny. They still feel under threat from the United States, and the first step, he says, toward talking again is for the U.S. to change its public characterization of North Korea. Very few journalists are allowed into this country, Charlie. We have not had much time on the ground yet, but I can share with you some initial impressions. It is not easy to get here, even from Beijing, North Korea's closest ally. There are only 2 flights a week, every Tuesday and Saturday. Approaching Pyongyang from the air, the landscape is very hilly and green. We could see the collective farms and the people working in the fields, but in the highways, we hardly saw any cars. The roads at mid-afternoon were nearly empty. Arriving at the airport, we were greeted by a large picture of Kim Il-sung, the country's longtime leader, who was given the title Eternal President after his death in 1994. There are pictures and statues of him all over North Korea, as well as his son Kim Jong-il, who is the current leader. Driving through the streets, curiously, there are no traffic lights. The intersections are controlled instead by police. And government officials who will be with us throughout our stay here told me they have not had stoplights in several years because of fuel and electricity shortages. There are also very few people right now in Pyongyang. Officials told us that is because 3 to 4 million city dwellers from across the country have been sent out to the countryside to work with the farmers to help plant the rice crop. North Korea is in the midst of a major food crisis, and they need to have a bumper crop this year. Charlie?
And Bob will be reporting from North Korea for the next several days. The Bush administration has been trying to get the North Koreans talking again about its nuclear program, so these recent indications from the North Koreans would seem to be good news for the administration. ABC's Terry Moran is at the White House tonight. Terry?
Well, Charlie, they are hopeful about this, but wary. Sometimes officials just don't know what to make of North Korea's statements. But after a year of stalemate, in recent weeks there have been some small, halting signs of progress toward resolving the North Korea nuclear crisis.
Whenever the six-party talks resume, if they do, major hurdles remain. North Korea wants direct talks with the U.S. because it fears the Bush administration is out to topple the regime of Kim Jong-il.
The real fundamental core here is regime survival and American acknowledgement of North Korea. Its right to govern in its own way, its sovereignty, is really at the heart of these discussions.
President Bush insists that North Korea come to the six-party negotiating table and agree to abandon all its nuclear weapons programs. And he's made clear his contempt for the country's leader.
Kim Jong-il is a dangerous person. He's a man who starves his people. He's got huge concentration camps.
Inside the Bush administration, there's a split on how to deal with North Korea. Some arguing for flexibility in the negotiations, other a tougher line. Right now, Charlie, they're just happy if they can get back to the table.
Terry, one other story from the White House. I know the British Prime Minister Blair was there today seeking major aid for Africa. Did he get it?
He got some, nowhere near what he wants, Charlie. What President Bush has promised is about $675 million in aid for food emergencies in Ethiopia and in that region. However, both men have said they are ready to cancel, forgive 100% of African debt, and that is a step forward.
All right, Terry Moran at the White House. There's troubling news for President Bush in a new ABC News Washington Post poll. 52% of Americans disapprove of the president's job performance. That's the highest disapproval rating for Mr. Bush since he took office. So we turn to the host of ABC's This Week, George Stephanopoulos. George, the other numbers for the president also bad, including diminishing support for the war in Iraq.
And that is the single biggest anchor on the president's job approval rating right now, Charlie. You also have a record, nearly 6 in 10 Americans saying now that they don't think the Iraq war was worth fighting. 58%, a record high. They think the casualties are too high. They think we're bogged down. And basically, Americans 5 months after the Iraqi elections are watching the news and listening to the president who says we're going to be there for a long time, and they don't like it.
So A, why does the White House think this is happening? And B, other than Iraq, and B, are they worried about it?
Well, they have to be worried about it because, Charlie, the president's agenda, in the second term, the 5th year is key in getting your agenda through Congress. The president has big plans. Number one, Social Security. The public's not buying that either. 62% don't approve of the president's handling of Social Security right now, and the clock is ticking. He knows he has to get that done this summer if it's going to get done in his second term.
Okay, George Stephanopoulos, host of This Week. The head of General Motors announced today the company is going to lay off 25,000 workers and close more manufacturing plants. That's the largest layoff any company has announced in the U.S. in more than 2 years. General Motors shareholders were angry at today's annual meeting, as ABC's Dean Reynolds reports.
The cuts were not entirely unexpected, but they were still unsettling for GM workers and shareholders.
I think they ought to start at the top and downsize from there.
Think they ought to start at the top?
Yeah.
We're just disheartened about the deterioration of a great company like General Motors.
GM has been cutting workers and closing plants for more than a decade. This one closed in April. But critics say it's still too slow and cumbersome to meet the challenge from foreign imports.
It keeps having to cut its prices and cut the number of cars it makes because it simply doesn't make cars that people want to buy. It makes them too expensively, and they're not reliable.
But company officials blame a lot of their problems on big health care commitments to workers and retirees. The plans GM now says must be adjusted.
This year, those commitments come to $5.6 billion and add $1,500 to a vehicle sticker price. Still, critics say GM has only itself to blame.
If General Motors were selling 1 million more cars, they'd be making a lot of money, and you wouldn't be hearing them complain about pension costs and health care costs.
Today's cutbacks are sure to have a negative economic impact on all the GM suppliers, the glass, tires, or steel manufacturers, and their workers and communities.
This is going to sweep through the Midwest like a flu in a college dormitory in February. This is really not good news for the U.S. manufacturing sector.
In this case, what's bad for General Motors, it seems, could be bad for the USA. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Chicago.
And on Capitol Hill today, news on the pensions that so many Americans depend on for their retirement. There are 31,000 traditional pension plans covering 44 million workers. An increasing number of them do not have enough money to fully cover promised benefits. And today, yet another airline said its pension plan is in trouble. Here's ABC's Lisa Stark.
Delta Airlines warned today, without a break on pension rules, it may follow United and U.S. Airways into bankruptcy and default on pension plans that cover 80,000 current and former employees.
It would be devastating to all the Delta employees, or any employee for that matter, who lost their earned pension.
This comes as the government released new numbers indicating more than 1,100 pension plans are seriously underfunded, with a record shortfall of $354 billion, up 27% over the previous year.
You've had a number of companies that have gone years without contributing to their pension plans, that have been on pension funding holidays.
It's all legal. Current laws allow companies to appear to be fully funding their pension plans when they're not, something the Bush administration wants to change.
The emphasis is on strengthening the funding rules and making sure that everybody lives by those rules.
But on Capitol Hill, Delta and other airlines were asking for relief, more time, decades, to fully fund their pension obligations. That drew a skeptical response.
You're going to listen, okay? how bad management at Delta Airlines has cost the employees of Delta, and you blame it on everybody but your own management group.
There's probably a lot of blame that can go around for the past. Our collective job is to focus on what we can do to make this company operate in the future.
Business groups contend any plan to tighten rules could convince companies to drop traditional pension plans. Lisa Stark, ABC News, Washington.
And when we return, the culture wars, the upstart phone company that calls its rivals sinners. We'll take a closer look. New hope for women who cannot conceive. A woman gives birth after receiving transplanted ovarian tissue. Medicine on the cutting edge. And tough times for the music industry. It has come to this. A cell phone ringtone is at the top of the charts. We are going to take a closer look tonight at a new battlefront in the culture wars, your telephone line. We've all gotten those calls from telemarketers trying to convince us to change long-distance carriers, but now some of those firms have found a new sales pitch. They say their phone service answers to a higher authority, while others, some of the biggest names in the industry, they say, promote sin. Here's ABC's Jake Tapper.
United American Technology has taken telemarketing to a whole new level. The conservative Christian long-distance carrier out of Oklahoma badmouths bigger rivals for sinful behavior.
You have the big phone companies, which are AT&T, MCI, and Sprint, and they're also all the biggest promoters of pornography on internet and TV and phone sex, same-sex marriages.
A UAT spokesman says corporations profiting from pornography are a fair target.
If big business wants to make money off of it, and they make billions off of it, we should be able to complain about what they're making money off of.
UAT also hopes to win clients who might oppose big long-distance carriers that offer diversity seminars.
Verizon, what they do is they train their employees to accept the gay and lesbian lifestyle.
Lots of marketers, from these people to Pepsi, are trying to create a reason for you to choose their commodity brand over another. And I guess, the culture wars are as good a reason as any.
Increasingly, corporations embrace political positions that cater to a specific clientele. Working Assets Long Distance markets itself as a liberal long-distance phone company and gives a percentage of its profits to liberal causes. Some say UAT takes its politics too far. New York City comedian Eugene Merman was so astonished by a UAT call he received, he recorded it.
Quit doing business with companies that promote and profit from the homosexual lifestyle.
Basically, God hates AT&T, MCI, and Verizon.
Yes.
Together, you and I will destroy the gays.
Exactly.
Like if I came out and I was like, you'll never believe what happened, people go, you're right, I don't believe you. But now that I have these recorded, the question isn't whether it was true, it's whether it's right.
None of the big long-distance companies would comment on their new conservative competition. Jake Tapper, ABC News, Washington.
And there is more on this new business strategy. Companies trying to capitalize on the culture wars at abcnews.com. When we come back, a sister's gift that's giving hope to so many in the fight against infertility. A story that is medicine on the cutting edge. In medical news, something of a breakthrough. A woman whose ovaries stopped working when she was a teenager has given birth. She conceived after receiving transplanted ovarian tissue. This is the first transplant of its kind to result in a successful birth, and it raises the possibility that infertile women may one day be able to experience childbirth. Here's ABC's Ned Potter.
Never lose hope.
Stephanie Yarber went through menopause when she was only 14. Very unusual, to be sure, but there are countless other women unable to have babies who might someday benefit from her case. Stephanie's sister, Melanie Morgan, was perfectly healthy and willing to donate one of her ovaries so Stephanie could have a baby.
I never hesitated at all about doing it. She's my sister, and I would do anything for her.
Last year, Stephanie received a transplant of ovarian tissue from her sister. The operation took 5 hours. Stephanie became pregnant 4 months later. And last night, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl.
The pregnancy was uneventful and the delivery was normal, as was the conception.
For now, such an operation is highly experimental, and Stephanie had luck on her side. She and Melanie happened to be identical twins, so there was almost no danger her immune system would reject the donated tissue. But in the future, doctors say the operation could be done on a woman who does not have a twin, perhaps someone who's been through menopause or survived cancer and wants to conceive her own children.
This could change so much for science and for women or girls who went through this, like I've went through this, and, you know, that they will have other options.
In the meantime, the Arbor's new baby weighs 7 pounds, 15 ounces. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
One of the country's great actresses has died. Anne Bancroft was in dozens of films. She won Best Actress for The Miracle Worker, playing a teacher who taught the blind and deaf Helen Keller to communicate. However, her greatest fame came in The Graduate. She was the older woman who seduced her daughter's boyfriend, played by Dustin Hoffman.
No. Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. Aren't you? Well, no, I hadn't thought of it. I feel very flattered. Mrs. Robinson, will you forgive me for what I just said? It's all right. It's not all right. It's the worst thing I ever said to anyone. Sit down.
She said she never quite understood why people were so fascinated by The Graduate. Ms. Bancroft was born Anna Maria Italiano. She was married for 40 years to the actor and writer Mel Brooks. Someone once called her the thinking man's fantasy, and she died of cancer at the age of 73. When we come back, a new generation of musical chart toppers coming from a cell phone near you. Finally tonight, who needs U2, Coldplay, Maroon 5, or Black Eyed Peas? They may be the biggest groups in music, but they're only the biggest human groups in music. There's now a new trend in the music industry that brings #1 hits from the most unlikely of sources. Here's ABC's Dan Harris.
Today, the rock band Coldplay released an album the music industry expects to be a bright spot in a year of sagging sales. So why then has Coldplay's new single been beaten for 2 weeks running on the British charts by something called Crazy Frog? This isn't even a real song. It's a ringtone for mobile phones.
I think that for a ringtone to be at the top of the English charts says to me that culture is at the brink of extinction.
It may mark the decline of civilization, but it also marks the rise of a massive trend. In April alone, 25 million Americans downloaded ringtones.
And then it says downloading, and then it basically comes up.
It is sort of like wearing designer clothes or getting a tattoo. Your ringtone says something about your personality and your lifestyle.
I think it's like original. When my phone rings, I know it's mine.
So if I have just regular rings on my phone, does that make me a complete loser?
No.
The record companies do make money off of ringtones, about $3 a pop, but that pales in comparison with CDs. And the problem is many young consumers will pay for a ringtone, but not for an entire album.
Kids right now, they don't think of music as something that comes on CDs. They think of music as something that comes through their computer, and they can take it for free.
Even some record company executives don't expect today's release of 3 likely hit albums from Coldplay, the Black Eyed Peas, and the White Stripes to save the industry.
I don't think in the long term it has any potential of reversing the trend.
Meanwhile, back in England, a backlash against the frog.
It's really, really annoying.
Frog foes are fighting fire with fire, putting out a new song called Kill That Frog, as a ringtone, of course. Dan Harris, ABC News, New York.
And that is our report on World News Tonight. I'm Charles Gibson. For Peter Jennings, and for all of us at ABC News, good night.